725% increase in the amount of Medicaid spending for kids without Social Security numbers in Illinois just over the past 5 years. That's according to the latest Freedom of Information Act responses that a State House candidate received from an Illinois agency. This is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. You can get this program each and every weekday morning live, but also in segments, plus the podcasts, and get the headlines at thecentersquare.com. So I talked with Bailey Templeton. She says that there is a lot more to tackle about this issue she's been tackling for more than a year, and that deals with Medicaid spending on children, and in particular, the amount of Medicaid spending that's being spent on kids without Social Security numbers. So I chatted with her Friday after she shared some FOIA information she received back, and she lays out exactly what it is that she did get back from the state agency dealing with Medicaid spending.
In my FOIA request response that I just obtained from HFS directly, we found the number of DCFS enrollees who have no registered Social Security number who are also receiving Medicaid benefits. And that number in 2021 was 450, but now in 2025, we're recording 1,085 children. If that's not astounding enough that there's 1,085 kids in DCFS care without a registered Social Security number, I think the financial aspect of it might grab some attention for you guys. We're talking about $8 million. Sorry, let me grab my paper here. $8 million was spent in 2021 on children without a registered Social Security number in Illinois DCFS care. But in 2025, that total went to $66 million spent on 1,085 children from the documents I received.
Again, that's from $8 million to $66 million that has been spent from 1 year in 2021 to another year in 2025. That's a 725% increase in the amount of spending for Medicaid on children without Social Security numbers. Templeton talked about where exactly some of that money's going.
We've got inpatient hospital stays, outpatient hospital, pharmacy, social work. I kind of asked them for a vague breakdown. But 39 million of that 66 million was used for inpatient hospital stays for these children. And I would kind of question whether all of these children are sick or not, or what's going on there, and how can we ensure that our taxpayers are being fully accounted for through Medicaid and through the DCFS funding? What steps could we take to kind of fill in these gaps to figure out what's going on with these children? I think a child who is undocumented or without a registered Social Security number is put at a very substantial risk for a lot of things happening for that child. Human trafficking is a big issue that we need to tackle, and a lot of people need to start talking about it to bring attention to the system. But I do believe that there's something going on here with these numbers, that we've been told that children without Social Security numbers are not on Medicaid, but HFS's own records prove differently.
So Templeton, looking at these numbers, requesting data from state agencies that deal with Medicaid, and in particular, she's looking at the cost of Medicaid for children without Social Security numbers. And previous FOIA responses she's received from state agencies also highlight that there are 20,000 children the state is dealing with that do not have Social Security numbers. Half of those are 0 to 1 years old, but the other half is 1 to 18 years old who don't have Social Security numbers. So those numbers, she says, doesn't really match up with previous data she received about kids and no Social Security numbers being impacted by the state government.
Oh, great question. Well, my original question to HFS was how much was it costing for the 20,358 children without a registered Social Security number? And when I found out that only 1,085 of them are in Illinois DCFS care, it raises questions about the other 19,000 children and whose care that they are in and who is overseeing the hospital treatments. I mean, if it's roughly $40 million spent on inpatient treatment, that's a lot of time for children to be in hospitals. I do want to reference federal cases that are on the docket right now about Illinois DCFS leaving children in psychiatric hospitals for extended periods of time. This doesn't point to psychiatric hospitals specifically, but it does say long-term hospital stays for these children.
One question I had asked Templeton, again, somebody who's running for the Republican primary in the 94th Illinois House District, and that primary coming up March 17th, she says that she's focusing on kids without Social Security numbers, not necessarily because of the immigration debate that is heated up all across the country, including right here in Illinois, with the state already spending billions of dollars on health benefits for non-citizens. She says that's not necessarily why she's looking at the children without Social Security numbers when it comes to these types of spending lines.
I would say that I think that every child in Illinois should be taken care of and respected. And one of the biggest steps to making sure that they're taken care of and respected is to make sure that there is oversight to what's happening to them, especially when they are involved in state agencies that have shown misconduct and misuse through other exposed FOIAs and other documentation like the intern investigations. My question would be how these 1,000 children ended up in Illinois DCFS care, and kind of just having some skepticism over the safety of what's happening to them when they are unregistered in the Social Security program. It's not about attacking children and trying to take away their health care by any means. It's about making sure that these children are safe and that whatever's happening to them is by the law and by the books and the way it should be.
And the issues that she raises tend to get a little bit in the territory of dark. She mentioned earlier human trafficking concerns, and she goes a bit further to talk about medical trafficking concerns.
Sure. I think it's a wide spectrum of things that could be happening here, and it wouldn't be right for me to say exactly what's happening, but I could say it raises questions about what would be called medical trafficking, where things are conducted onto children when they're too young to be able to consent to these things happening. I can't prove what's happening to these children, but there are reasons that the Nuremberg Code was written the way that it was, and children can't consent to what could be happening to them. And yes, it is a really dark side, but there are really dark things happening in this country and across the world, and we are all aware of that. And it's very important to bring light to the dark because they can't coexist. So if we continue to shine a light on things that could be harming children, I have hopes that we could solve this and protect more children. Whether they are registered Social Security number holders or not, I want to make sure these children are safe.
And the issue, obviously, something she says needs more transparency and needs more coverage, not just from media, but also from legislators and people who do oversight.
We need to make sure that our funding is going to where it needs to be, not to... It could potentially, there could be fraudulent Medicaid charges. There could be so many different aspects to this situation that we just need transparency so there's not so many what if questions. And we need lawmakers and we need the people to start asking these questions so there can be enough coverage to change it.
And Templeton also saying this all is under Governor J.B. Pritzker's administration from 2021, $8 million up to, in 2025, $66 million.
I think the taxpayers deserve answers, 100%. We are paying for everything that is coming forth through this overpayment system. That's coming from your money that should be going to you and your family directly. I think that state agencies have way too much power and that they have way too little oversight. And this really does fall on the lap of Pritzker. Once again, he is allowing his state agencies to break the law, to break constitutional rights, and to do things that are really obscene and unheard of. And Pritzker's got to go. That's just the bottom line to it. He's got to go. He does not have the morals that it takes to be a governor, to follow the laws and to keep our children here protected.
Again, Templeton is a political candidate that's running for the state house in a Republican primary. She also said that she's going to continue fighting to get more information on these issues and taking different avenues as well to find accountability for children in the system. And she says she's been working on getting this data for well over a year.
So there is a lot of pushback from the agencies, which they're not allowed to have with FOIA. FOIA was created pursuant to the Constitution, meaning it follows the Constitution. You have to keep all of the constitutional protections with FOIA. And if they continue to break those, they will be held liable for the things that they're doing. There's FOIA court where you can take them and force them to give you the information, but it shouldn't have to come to that. It should be immediate transparency. Everybody should want to collaborate and work together to solve the problem. And the fact that there's any pushback at all is super appalling. It shouldn't be that way.
So Bailey Templeton, I think we'll hear more about these issues from as she continues to delve into the data, and in particular, the demographics of the kids without Social Security numbers getting Medicaid services. And it's going to be difficult to, I guess, in a way, determine just what kinds of procedures were done with some of this money because of various, privacy laws and such when it comes to medical information. So a lot more to come about this.
We need the Attorney General to step in and say, the buck stops here. The Attorney General is not going to allow local governments to break the law anymore in the state of Illinois.
I'm not informed on that. It should be clear that in Illinois' landscape of criminal enforcement, we are not the primary prosecutor's office.
Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul reacting to a question from the Center Square last week of concerns brought forward by Americans for Prosperity Illinois concerning the issue of taxpayer dollars and how they're used by local governments to possibly promote tax increase referendum. It's Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Wake up with us at thecentersquare.com. Get the newsletter in your inbox, and all those headlines will be there, but you can check out other headlines at thecentersquare.com. Talked with Americans for Prosperity Illinois Director Brian Costin. He's the state director of AFP Illinois, and he talked about what they're finding and how they need some clarity from the Illinois Attorney General for issues that voters determine, but how are they being swayed by local officials using taxpayer dollars is a question that we've seen brought up in previous election times, but here we are approaching a 2026 election, and you could have across the state local referendum about tax increases, and Brian says that he's concerned as to how this ultimately will impact taxpayers if it's not clarified.
We need the Attorney General to step in and say, the buck stops here. Yeah, so we've seen this in a number of places across the state of Illinois where local taxing bodies are using public money to hire what I would call as professional tax hiking organizations to run public campaigns designed to gather support for tax hike referendums, specifically property tax hike referendums. And in some of these cases before, there's not a lot of avenue for citizens to do anything about it.
Counties, so I hope you ask the same.
How they can think that they've crossed the line in District 214, where they've done polling basically to get an understanding of what is the level of tax hike that the public might be comfortable with. They are trying to figure out how they can raise taxes on the people. And in the State Employees and Ethics Act, polling in connection with a referendum is verboten. It's not supposed to happen. And so we've sent a letter to the Attorney General asking them for clarification on the issue. Is this legal? Is this not legal? According to state statute, it looks like it's illegal. There's really no government body that is really paying attention to this too closely. In the past, we have sent some things to the Attorney General, and they basically said this is not our jurisdiction. Well, whose jurisdiction is it for the State Employees and Ethics Act? Local governments are supposed to be following these laws. So we want to get some clarification from the Attorney General. Can local government bodies work with private firms that say on their materials that their job and what they do and what they're successful at is passing tax hike referendums on the people of Illinois who are paying the highest property taxes in the nation? We think that taxpayers need a little bit of defending in the state of Illinois, and that's what we're trying to do.
So Costin laying that out for District 214, which I believe is a high school district in Arlington Heights. But he said says that it's happened elsewhere. And you think about this in the context too of in 2020, there was a referendum on the ballot statewide asking voters in Illinois to change the state constitution's flat income tax to a tax with higher rates for higher earners, and voters rejected that. There was advocacy from state legislators when they were discussing the measure on the General Assembly floor, but that wasn't using tax dollars to go out and try to gauge public interest about it, other than through that referendum process, right? Yes, tax dollars were used, but the question was vetted to be clear, concise, and neutral. It wasn't a poll of sorts to say, hey, do you want to tax the rich to feed the poor, or do you want to let the wealthy keep their money, right? And you can craft poll questions all kinds of different ways. So, you have the referendum process and elected officials debating it and, advocating or opposing it, right? But that's in their official capacity as a legislative body. If the governor's office was to use official governor office, resources to put out messaging in favor of the issue, that would raise some ethical questions. Well, what about on the local government if they do that? So that's what Costin's warning about. And he says this has happened in the past and they really need that clarity.
Yeah, so it's very, very common that when a property tax increase, sales tax increase referendum goes on the ballot, that local government bodies hire people for public information campaigns. They're not supposed to cross a line and actually encourage people to vote one way or the other. But we can't, say, for example, in District 214, which is proposing up to a they're talking about proposing a $900 million referendum. The materials that they were receiving from the companies to do these public information campaigns were loaded with references of passing referendums in difficult tax environments. And so it's quite clear that the types of firms that they're trying to hire are people who are engaging in politics. A couple of stories: Rochester, Illinois. They hired a couple of firms to do the Creative Entourage was the name of the organization, and they hired them to do polling, basically asking, do you think that the library is valuable? Do we need money? Do you support that? And then they turned that information over to first the Rochester Library, and then the Rochester Library sent that over to the campaign committee, including all the information of the people who took that poll. That crossed the line. We filed an ethics complaint. The Ethics Commission basically said, yes, these things that we were saying are essentially true, but we can't do anything about it because their ordinance was defective. So what happens when local governments are breaking the law to try to pass tax increases? We need the Attorney General to step in and say, the buck stops here. The Attorney General is not going to allow local governments to break the law anymore in the state of Illinois. They do have a model ordinance on their website, which they recommend to local governments to use to comply with state law. But then there's no enforcement of it when local governments cross that line. And so we need the Attorney General or the General Assembly to say, hey, we need someone to step in and make sure that taxpayers are being protected and local governments aren't engaging in prohibited political activity that tip the scales in favor of tax hikes on the people of Illinois, who are the most taxed people in the entire country.
Now, the Center Square's Jim Talamonte was in front of Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul last week, and he asked about, is this worth investigating in this particular school district that AFP Illinois raised, but also just the general issue. Here's what the Attorney General responded with.
I'm not informed on that. It should be clear that in Illinois' landscape of criminal enforcement, we are not the primary prosecutor's office. There are some attorneys general offices in other attorney general's offices in other states where they are both the statewide prosecutor and the local prosecutor. The majority of criminal cases in the state of Illinois and the structure of our criminal justice system are prosecuted by local prosecutors. So I don't even know where District 214 is, whether it's in Cook County or another county. So I hope you ask the same question to the local prosecutor wherever District 214 is.
So you've got Costin saying that they've put formal requests in. They've tried to do this. Local bodies saying they don't really know how to rectify this or hold people accountable. And Costin's group, AFP Illinois, is asking for the Attorney General to clarify this. So we'll see if there's any further on this. But Costin warning taxpayers ahead of the 2026 elections as to watching their local governments and how they're spending dollars on potential referendum questions.
Yeah, there's going to be elections and referendums that are coming up this November and next year in April. I think what you should be aware of as a taxpayer is if you see your local government body hiring a company to doing a political public information campaign, that should set your alarm off, and then you should start digging into it to see if they are crossing the line and violating state law. The reason that they do these public information campaigns is primarily to raise your taxes. And so if they're doing polling to see what type of tax hike that the public might be comfortable with, that's a big red flag. If they're talking only on one side of the issue on why this is absolutely necessary and not talking about the costs to the taxpayers, that's another giant red flag. If you're having issues with that, reach out to an organization like Americans for Prosperity. We're interested in balancing the scales a little bit for the taxpayers. We want to make sure that local governments aren't breaking the law. And if you suspect that, please reach out to us and we'll see what we can do.
Clearly, we'll hear a lot more about this as we get closer to the elections. We got a March primary statewide, and there might be some local questions that you have to consider. Then you got the election in November. We could see a referendum statewide on the ballot in November concerning tax increases for millionaires. These are just some of the stories that you'll see at the Center Square, Illinois. Encourage you to go check that out, where another great report from Jim Talamonte about last night's debate between 3 of the 10 Democrats running for U.S. Senate. You can also read about a proposal to tax millionaires with half the money going to school districts and half the money going to property tax relief.
I do that all the time. I shake up teams. Everybody here, these are a lot of owners of farms and places, and you shake up your team. If they can't do the crops fast enough, look, we have an incredible team. We did something that nobody said was possible. We did something that I would say people thought that was absolutely impossible, and we were able to do it. So we're very honored by what's happened to our country.
It's President Donald Trump last night visiting a diner before he gave a speech, and he's talking about crime and addressing the immigration issue in Minnesota as the president shakes his team up, taking Gregory Bovino and moving him out and bringing Tom Homan in. And Tom Homan touching base with local leaders there. It is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and wake up with us each and every weekday morning. So the president talking about crime and bringing it down, but obviously with that shakeup, he talked about how he's working to de-escalate the situation and the tensions in Minneapolis after the shooting death of Alex Preddy. Here is the president talking about addressing crime.
Just had a crime report coming out from, I think, one of the networks, which they hate to hear this, but crime is the lowest number ever recorded. Yeah. So, we talk about Minnesota, but in Minnesota, you probably read, their crime is way down. You know why? Because we took out thousands of criminals out of Minnesota, and that's why it's good.
But obviously, you've got the questions and concerns about how that's being conducted with that shooting death of Alex Preddy, and also the police-involved shooting death of Renee Good, both who showed up to official immigration enforcement operations and seemed to be impeding those operations. Preddy having a firearm on him. Trump saying that you shouldn't be showing up to these types of places with firearms.
Do you think he was acting as an assassin in Minneapolis?
Who is that?
Mr. Preddy, your deputy chief of staff
No,
said
not
that.
it.
You don't think he
With that being said, you can't have guns. You can't walk in with guns. You just can't. And you can't, listen, you can't walk in with guns. You can't do that. But it's a very unfortunate.
So the president saying that you can't walk into these areas with firearms, and there's still an investigation ongoing with that. But Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson talking yesterday about how he wants the city of Chicago to do something about prosecuting what he says are bad actors in the federal government.
We have to seriously look at how local government can ultimately not just bring charges and investigation against the federal overreach, but how we can create a process that allows for prosecution of these individuals on the streets across this country.
And obviously with the situation in Minneapolis still very much top of mind, that's where the mayor is training his focus. And again, talking about the steps that he thinks Chicago can take to have some more accountability for ICE.
Specifically, we are discussing an amendment that would allow COPA to investigate alleged violations of our Welcoming City Ordinance. This is an important amendment that we have championed since the internal review we conducted with our IMER team following the June 4th ICE raid.
So that ICE raid that he mentions there, there's a lot of discussion about a landlord who in an apartment building may have tipped ICE off, and there's a state investigation into that. And if so, I mean, you've got a private property owner who's tipping off law enforcement. I know that Illinois passed migrant sanctuary laws to essentially say that those here as non-citizens shouldn't have to fear going to police to report things, being the victim of a crime. But is the state going to look to investigate somebody who's reporting a federal crime? Is that going to chill other landlords in doing the same thing? We'll see how that situation plays out. But obviously, a lot of your tax dollars funding all of these operations, including the local governments who, in some jurisdictions, are opposing federal immigration enforcement.
I don't know. There's nothing like 66 million. In the state of Illinois, we only have 13 million people. So no, that's just false.
It's Governor J.B. Pritzker yesterday answering a question from the Center Square's Jim Talamonte about the report we put out earlier this week concerning the increase of Medicaid dollars for children without Social Security numbers. You can find that headline at thecentersquare.com from earlier this week. FOIA reveals 725% increase in Medicaid for Illinois children without Social Security numbers. And we talked with Bailey Templeton for this story, and ultimately what it shows is her FOIA request she received back after working on these questions for a year. She found that in 1 year, there was about $8 million spent in 2021 for about 450 children. But that number in 2025 jumped up to $66 million to care for 1,085 children. Templeton told us earlier this week about what exactly these costs being incurred by taxpayers are for.
Sure. I think it's a wide spectrum of things that could be happening here, and it wouldn't be right for me to say exactly what's happening, but I could say it raises questions about what would be called medical trafficking, where things are conducted onto children when they're too young to be able to consent to these things happening. I can't prove what's happening to these children, but there are reasons that the Nuremberg Code was written the way that it was, and children can't consent to medical procedures. And if they don't have anybody watching out for what's best for them, you never know what could be happening to them. And yes, it is a really dark side, but there are really dark things happening in this country and across the world, and we are all aware of that. And it's very important to bring light to the dark because they can't coexist. So if we continue to shine a light on things that could be harming children, I have hopes that we could solve this and protect more children. Whether they are registered Social Security number holders or not, I want to make sure these children are safe.
And when I asked her if this was just to give more fuel to the fire of those wanting to go after non-citizens in the country, Templeton said no, it's because children without Social Security numbers are the most vulnerable, and they need to have transparency on what's happening to them, especially if they can't speak for themselves. So Templeton raising these issues, and seemingly the data that she got from the Pritzker administration shows that 725% increase in the number of dollars going out over the span of 5 years. In 2020, 8 million. In 2025, 66 million. This is what Governor J.B. Pritzker said when the Center Square's Jim Talamonte was in front of him yesterday, asking him, can you explain the 725% increase in Medicaid payment for the cost of $66 million is what ultimately the data shows. And here's Pritzker reacting, seeming to not understand the question.
I don't know. That's just an inaccurate. Maybe Lizzie wants to speak to it, but that I don't know. There's nothing like 66 million in the state of Illinois. We only have 13 million people. So no, that's just false.
It wasn't a question of 66 million people. It was $66 million. And you can see he dismissed the question and then just went off to another question. Again, we reached out to the departments that has these numbers. They did not respond to multiple attempts to get a response, and the governor not really addressing the question either. So the questions still remain, and maybe the governor just needs to be posed the question a little bit more directly. And we'll see if that can happen sometime when he has another news conference. He doesn't have one scheduled today, but ultimately Templeton, who's running for a seat in the state house, Republican primary for the 94th Illinois House district, she says that ultimately Pritzker needs to go because all of this lands on his lap.
I think the taxpayers deserve answers 100%. We are paying for everything that is coming forth through this overpayment system. That's coming from your money that should be going to you and your family directly. I think that state agencies have way too much power and that they have way too little oversight. And this really does fall on the lap of Pritzker. Once again, he is allowing his state agencies to break the law, to break constitutional rights, and to do things that are really obscene and unheard of. And Pritzker's got to go. That's just the bottom line to it. He's got to go. He does not have the morals that it takes to be a governor, to follow the laws and to keep our children here protected.
Now, we do have a gubernatorial election that is happening in November. Pritzker running for a third consecutive term. You've got several Republican candidates on the primary ballot in March that are going up against each other. Darren Bailey, Ted Dabrowski, James Mendrick, Rick Heidner. People will line up to talk to here. Maybe next week we can line those up. But ultimately, again, you've got the governor running. And is this an issue that's going to come up and hit him? We'll see. Another thing, the governor yesterday holding a news conference, and you can find out what exactly that news conference was all about at thecentersquare.com in the Illinois page. If you check that out, you'll see Jim Talamonte's reporting on what the governor was doing yesterday. And he was ultimately expanding access and funding for abortion, but Republicans pushing back about that funding. So what ultimately the governor did, joined abortion advocacy groups in Chicago Wednesday to announce a new fund connecting donor support with organizations protecting and expanding reproductive health care access. But you have State Representative Noreen Hammond saying that Illinois should not use Medicaid dollars to provide abortions. Clearly a lot more debate about that, but Republicans in the minority, and reproductive health care is a big political issue for Democrats. But the governor also being asked about ICE, and he says that ICE is in need of reform. He also discussed how he says that ICE diminishes people's rights here in Illinois.
Who knows
and beyond.
what Tom Homan is now going to be. He was bad from the start. They seem to have moved him away because he seems to have accepted bribes. And now they're moving him back in because that's acceptable in this administration, apparently. So we'll see what happens. But I can tell you that the procedures, the attitude, the methodology, indeed all of what Trump has built at ICE and CBP needs to be thrown out and revamped. And we need to have people who are actually professionally prepared to do law enforcement, and instead of taking away people's constitutional rights. The First, the Fourth, the Fifth, the 10th Amendments, these are all under attack just by ICE and CBP.
Now, a lot of you watching are going to be quick to say, well, what about the Second Amendment rights that Governor J.B. Pritzker has torn apart with the Protect Illinois Communities Act, the ban on semi-automatic firearms and magazines over certain capacities and the registration. But I mean, regardless, the governor talking about rights of free speech, free assembly, warrantless, you're free from having to go through, warrantless searches and such. So he's laying out all those rights as paramount. But again, I'm sure a lot of you watching will just reflect on, now we're at year 3 of the Protect Illinois Communities Act being in place while the judiciary continues to sit on the case before it can be pushed up to the U.S. Supreme Court, which has already indicated they won't take it. But anyways, I digress from the issue of Pritzker talking about ICE. He goes on to say that ICE is costing taxpayers a lot of money.
They're now going to spend a whole bunch of money building up what can only be described as a secret police force at ICE, where they're going to multiply by 7 the amount of money that will go into ICE. That is what now is being debated at the U.S. Senate.
Now, what's going to happen in the U.S. Senate? Well, you got Democrats who are wanting to essentially block that funding for ICE. And that could lead to partial government shutdown after we just had a 40-plus day full government shutdown. So we're going to see a partial government shutdown over the funding for immigration customs enforcement. That's a great question. The governor was asked about something else yesterday as well, unrelated to the news conference he held about access to abortions and dollars being used for that. He talked about, he was asked about the National School Choice Credit Tax Credit Program and whether or not Illinois is going to join that. A lot of other states are joining that. And you've got some reports from various organizations highlighting these things, including from Ballotpedia, of the different types of states that are going on to this U.S. school choice tax credits program. And you can see a map here of just some of the states that have opted in, that have formally opted in, and have taken official action to opt in. A governor has made the call to opt in, and these are all ways that you could opt into that National School Choice Scholarship Program. Now, this is different than the Invest in Kids program that Illinois had for several years, I think from 2018 to 2023, or was it 2024 at the end of 2024? Either way, the program was allowed to expire despite groups, bipartisan groups saying, hey, we need this program. It's helping out kids get out of failing public schools. And it gives a tax credit to those private tax dollars that are being put into school granting, scholarship granting organizations. So these SGOs would take the dollars, people would write off that on their Illinois taxes, and they'd get a tax credit for it. But they let the program end. Right, even though thousands of families were helped with it and schools were thriving because of it, private schools, school choice was thriving in Illinois. It ended because teacher unions pushed back and said it's taking tax dollars away from public schools, even though these were private dollars going into a fund. So Pritzker asked about the national program. That's part of that one big, beautiful bill that President Donald Trump signed July 4th in 2025. It creates this school choice scholarship program nationwide. Now, it's not as generous as the Illinois Invest in Kids program, which I believe was like $10,000 or something, or it was like a certain percentage. It's been so long since it's been in place and we reported on it. It's escaping my mind. You got a healthy tax credit for it up to a certain cap. I mean, it was like millions of dollars, but the national program, not as generous. I think it's like $1,000 tax credit you can get, but states have to opt into the program to be able to take part in it. Pritzker was asked about that yesterday. And here's what he had to say about the possibility of a school choice scholarship national program, Illinois joining.
Nothing's changed. We have not seen any rules that have been put out. Remember, the federal government hasn't put any rules around this program. Those rules, when they're issued, we'll be able to evaluate whether that's good for the state of Illinois and the people of Illinois or not. But until we have that, right, just on its face, the question is this just a repeat of trying to take money out of public schools and move it into private schools, which is what the Trump administration, generally speaking, has been in favor of. Or is this something that could be useful? But we just don't know because there are no rules around it right now. We await that. It was supposed to come out, as far as I understood, those rules were supposed to come out before the end of the year. They still aren't out. So we'll take a look at those and make a decision. The state program, that Invest in Kids program, had its own rules that were written into the legislation. We knew what that was, how that was supposed to be used. We don't know what the federal program will be used for, and that's what we're waiting rules for.
So the rules, are they out? They're going to come out. If they come out and they're good for Illinois, Pritzker says he'll look at joining, and the legislature could also do that as well. Things that may be considered this legislative session as lawmakers come back next month to continue on with spring session. Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program work requirements are now February 1st being implemented, as we see here from the Illinois Department of Human Services. This is Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Join us each and every weekday morning for the latest in Illinois, and subscribe for the newsletter at thecentersquare.com. So, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, SNAP. It's food stamps, subsidies for nutrition, goes through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. States receive this money, and then they distribute it as needed. Now, a lot of different movements with SNAP, and we'll just look here at the latest from the Illinois Department of Human Services, where they say notice of SNAP work requirement changes. And they go through and list out implementation date of the SNAP work requirement rules, moved to February 1st. So that is Sunday, first countable month for those who are not meeting the work requirements or eligible conditions from an exemption will be February 2026. So clients who previously received countable months of for December and January will have those months removed from their countable months and receive a notice here alerting them to the change. Due to a court ruling, the start dates of those work requirements, February 1st. February 2026 will be the first month eligible to be counted towards the 3-month time limit for SNAP household members who are subject to the SNAP work requirement. Any countable months received prior to February 2026 will be removed. So that ultimately means you've got work requirements kicking in, and people who aren't able to prove that they are seeking work or working will have to go and, have 3 months possibly of assistance, and then that's it. But look at the overall amount of SNAP dollars nationwide that has been spent historically. All right, all the way back to 1969, this chart from the federal government shows just how much in millions of dollars. So you're talking $250 million back in 1969, and that's increased all the way up to $113 billion in 2023, $99 billion for 2024. So that's nationwide. And what it looks like for the various states, you could see here for Illinois in 2025, you've got $4.4 billion with that helping around 1.04 million people, households, 1.9 million people in the state of Illinois. So you're looking at about cost per household, about $355, and then cost per person about $195. So that's how much Illinois is costing in taxpayer dollars for supplemental nutrition assistance program. But then you look at the error rate of payments that Illinois pays out, and you've got another chart here from the U.S. Department of Agriculture breaking down all the overpayments and underpayments and the payment error rates, because the error rate includes both the over and the underpayments. Illinois, you see, it has a 10.64 overpayment error rate and a 9.93 underpayment. So the vast majority of those payments are overpayments, and that makes the error rate 11.56. There's been a lot of criticism about the handling of SNAP, and you've got these high error rates in states like Illinois. Other states, Alaska's got a 25% error rate, 22% of that's overpayments. A lot of states tackling, double-digit percentage error rates, and they have to bring it down, or else the state's going to be on the hook for the difference between 6% and 11%, almost 12% for Illinois. Has the error rate always been that high, up to 11.5%? Well, again, looking at the fiscal year 2024 number versus the fiscal year 2014 number, what was Illinois' error rate? So let's find that here. Illinois just passed it And you're looking at a 5.27% error rate in 2014. So that error rate, again, more than doubling in the past 10 years. What's going on there? Well, you had COVID and a whole bunch of other things, and relaxing of the work requirements. Well, those work requirements, again, are changing come Sunday under what the Trump administration approved in legislation back in July 4th of 2025. All right, so that's just a little overview of some of the SNAP funding issues that you're going to be hearing about heading into the weekend, and you're getting it right here with Illinois in Focus Daily. I'm Greg Bishop. Wake up with us each and every weekday morning for the latest here from Illinois for the Center Square.